Good morning, gents. Dominic, what role do you see for national parliaments in effecting change at a European level?
Historically, the role of national parliaments has been to scrutinise legislation coming down from Europe, to interpret how that's going to impact on Irish citizens and citizens in other countries. When Lisbon came in, the Lisbon Treaty gave more powers to the European parliamentarians in terms of things like co-decision making and the like. That meant that there was a perception out there that there was a relative shift of powers away from national parliaments. In fact, Lisbon allows national parliamentarians to raise a yellow card if they're concerned about some legislation that comes forward. They can go, we're not sure about this. Can you think again, Mr. Commission, and decide whether or not this is in the best interests? Some people feel it should go further, that there should be other types of cards, for instance, a green card, which would allow national parliaments to suggest legislation that could be enacted by the Commission. Some people feel that national parliaments should be able to stop legislation, not just criticise it or suggest changes. So there's developing conversations about how best to involve national parliamentarians. The Irish Committee is one of the committees that is involved in a small group of national parliaments who are discussing this issue at a European level. What we want to see is better interaction between parliaments across Europe. We also want to see more engagement with the European Commission. We want to see commissioners coming forward in front of national parliaments and explaining exactly why they think pieces of legislation are in the national interest. I think it's essential that we do have a better involvement. I think it helps to spread democratic legitimacy and ensures that the average citizen is more aware about what's going on at a European level.
Okay, what do you see as some of the main challenges for Europe at this time?
The challenges. Well, the European project, of course, was set up after the Second World War, the Coal and Steel Organisation, to try to ensure that peace was stabilised. We saw prosperity being put on the agenda in terms of things like the single market and, of course, then the advent of the Eurozone. After that, in the early part of this century, the discussion was, where do we go next? And there was a European constitution put forward. Many people thought that went a step too far. We saw the 95% of that enacted in the Lisbon Treaty. And many people would now question whether or not we need to see further integration. We see some countries wondering whether or not the powers of national parliaments have been denuded and too much power has been given away to Brussels at the same time. And for instance, we see as a result of that a potential of Britain exiting the European Union, as well as other countries looking at how best these powers can be given back to national parliaments. At the same time, we see others who feel that things haven't gone far enough. Others who worry that the economic project, the Eurozone, doesn't have the necessary level of integration there to ensure that it's a success. They want to see greater integration. So our big challenge now is, where do we go next? Do we have this one-size-fits-all approach, or do we try to reach out and have different models within the European Union that can allow each country to remain involved, but yet to ensure that their views are taken on board?
That's great. Peter, so can you tell us about your role as the Special Representative of the Secretary-General of the UN for Migration and International Development?
Yes, in 2006, Kofi Annan was Secretary-General of the UN, and he contacted me. I had known him when I was in Geneva in the World Trade Organization, and he asked me whether I would be able to become special representative for him in the area of migration policy. When I inquired as to what that entailed, I was told that it meant that I had to try to coordinate the different UN agencies who have a responsibility in one way or another for migrants. So that includes, obviously, refugees. The various different elements in the UN system that deal with it are things like UNHCR, which deals with refugees, ILO, the International Labour Organization, which deals with work standards and requirements, Human Rights Commissioner, and various others. And from outside the UN system, ION, the International Organization of Migration. So in the intervening period, I have remained, and am now, to Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary-General, his special representative, who's in charge of trying to coordinate. In charge, in fact, is an exaggeration, because it's merely a question of trying to get people to work together and to formulate policies for the Secretary-General. And I've been doing that since 2006.
Okay, very good. And you're here today. I think you're going before the European Affairs Committee later. What will you be telling the committee?
I will be referring, obviously, to the European dimension of the problem that we're describing, the problem of migration. And I will be focusing, I think, particularly on the issue of refugees. I think it's important to draw a distinction within the migrant community between refugees, who are, by definition, people who are escaping from persecution, on the one hand, and economic migrants, who are people who are looking for a better life, on the other hand. The obligation to those who are refugees is a clear one. Under a 1951 convention, all the European countries have agreed that they will not send back, refoulement is the term used, they will not send back those who are entitled to sanctuary as refugees, those who fear persecution. What has happened in the interval is that there has been an increasing number of migrants and refugees across the Mediterranean. And this has led to appalling tragedies and to over 3,500 lives being lost in the last year. And those are the ones that we know about through sinking boats in the Mediterranean. Many of these, a majority of these, but certainly I think 50%, are refugees. And many of these come from Syria or from Eritrea. And they pay what are enormous sums of money to smugglers to bring them across the Mediterranean. And I will be speaking about the obligation on the European Union member states to provide, first of all, for the safety of these people who are dying in their thousands, as I've said, and secondly, to have a more coherent policy in regard to their reception within Europe and dealing with refugees and migrants more generally. There is no magic wand here. There's no silver bullet. So there's no simple way of solving all the problems. We have a huge growing population in Africa. We have a huge growing population in Asia. And inevitably, it's going to lead to pressures in regard to migrants. But we have to handle it more coherently and with greater humanitarian zeal than is obvious to date.
And just finally then, Dominic, just in relation to what Peter has said here today, what's the role for our own Joint Committee on European Affairs and the interest level there in relation to the situation with refugees coming into Europe?
The interest level is very high, and that's one of the reasons why we've asked Peter in today. We think that we need to make as much noise about this as possible. We need to put as much pressure on our government as possible, and in turn get our government to put pressure on at the European level. I think it's important not to forget that Ireland is a country that completely understands the issue of emigration. During the 1840s and 1850s, we lost a quarter of our population because of famine. Europe also knows what it's like to see mass emigration. After the Second World War, Europe was a continent on the move. Many millions of our citizens moved to other non-European countries and sought safety there, sought security, sought employment, sought a new way of life. And other countries measured up in those years. I think it's something that us Europeans need to remember.
Okay, that's great. Gentlemen, I'd just like to say thank you for joining me on Oireachtas TV this morning, and good luck with your deliberations at the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.